day. Joining us now, GOP Strategist Henry Barbour. Good to see you again, Henry.
Gerard, hey, man. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So you just recently attended the RNC meeting. What happened there?
Well, we had our election for officers. The chair race was the big race.
Right.
Ronna McDaniel was running for really an unprecedented 4 terms. She's been chair for the last 6 years. She first came in with Donald Trump, and then after Trump lost in 20, she stayed. She got reelected, actually unopposed. And but this time she had real strong competition. Harmeet Dillon is a national committee woman from California. She is a super talented and bright attorney who is tough. And she ran a strong race. And then Mike Lindell, Mr. My Pillow, jumped in the race. And I didn't know what to think about him, but it's interesting, Gerard. We all got out there. We were out in California for this meeting. And we all got a text on our phone saying, hey, Mike Lindell's holding a reception. And we're all like, oh, we want to go. And it was just up in his hotel suite. And we went up there, and I didn't take him very seriously as a candidate for RNC chair because it's just he's in the pillow business. But he couldn't have been nicer. And I saw him a couple of days later. He remembered my name, wanted to chat, and I think he's a guy that wants to learn more. Yeah. Anyway, he got 4 votes. Ronna got 111 and Harmeet got 51. So Ronna won pretty handily, but it could have been a lot closer. I think if Harmeet had run a little bit different campaign, there were a lot of people on the committee that were interested in change, but they weren't quite sure that she was the right person for the change, and some of her team around her made people nervous, and so. A lot of factors, but it was interesting. President Trump endorsed 2 candidates in lesser positions, the co-chair race and the treasurer race. And interesting, both his candidates lost. Right. And people have thought that the RNC is really now controlled by Trump, but I think that's a sign that that's not necessarily the case. And I think. One thing the RNC has to be in this race that the DNC wasn't in 2016 is neutral. Let the voters decide. Let the candidates go out there and do their thing and make their pitch and then let the voters decide. That's let's not put our hands on the scale. Debates, primary debates was a big discussion, Gerard, and those will start in August or September, but. One of the things that Ronna McDaniel deserves credit for is saying, look, Republican nominee will not be there for this presidential debate commission that had just gotten so left-leaning that it was absurd. And so I give Ronna and the RNC a lot of credit for getting our candidate out of that. And I expect when we have the general election for president in 24, there will be debates, just like any campaign. You don't have to have a debate commission to put a debate together. You just got to have 2 campaigns that, want to get out there and duke it out. Yeah, agree to a debate. So you alluded to it, Henry. Harmeet Dillon is quite sharp, thinks fast on her feet. Yeah. And is sort of a non-emotional person that is very clear thinking and cuts to the chase. My question for you is, and you're probably closer to this than anybody else in the state, Henry, how big a factor is the RNC chair? Because the name of the game is winning races. How big a factor is the RNC chair in winning races for Republicans? So the Republican National Committee has a big role in out there in campaign world, and with state parties particularly, but as the party, what we do is we put the infrastructure together, the long-term voter registration, absentee ballots, early voting in states not Mississippi, but huge voter file and all the data And so it's doing the sort of blocking and tackling, the infrastructure that you have to have for campaigns to win. But candidates, obviously, and campaigns, they're focused on the message. The RNC doesn't buy political advertising. Very rarely do they. It's the candidates, who are telling you what the message is and why you should vote for them. But the RNC has an important role. But if you look back at 2022 and you scratch your head and kind of wonder, why did we lose? And in fact, Ronna has asked me and Harmeet Dillon and 2 other members of the RNC to look into what happened in 22. Were we as good as we thought? Or where were the problems? Because we thought we were going to probably win some more races. How big was the Dobbs decision? And it was significant. It changed voter intensity in a matter of days.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at all that. But there are a lot of other groups. Since Citizens United and McCain-Feingold, Campaign Finance Board, RNC can't take soft money. And so the RNC is a little less relevant than it was 15, 20 years ago because now you have all these super PACs, the Senate Leadership Fund, the House Leadership Fund, that bring in all this money that McCarthy drives one, Mitch McConnell drives the other, and there are a lot of other groups out there. So the RNC is not as big a player as it was when my Uncle Haley was RNC chair, but it's still a significant player, and it's in charge of the presidential primary process. So we're in charge of the debates. We're in charge, of course, of the convention. So it plays a big role. But, as I look at 22, and you and I have talked about this right after the election, I think, one of the biggest factors was that the candidates who were focused on the future, who were focused on public policy, did much, much better than the candidates who were stuck in the past. And people kind of want to move on from past elections, and they want somebody with an aspirational message. How are you going to make my life better? Because that's really all I care about. Am I going to be safer? Are we going to have better schools? Are we going to have some jobs?
Totally agree. Completely agree with you. And I think that trend's going to continue, Henry. That's
Amen.
Doesn't just apply to 22. I want to know what you're going to do, not just that you're not somebody else or you want to go revisit the past and dig that up and analyze that. It's just not really moving the needle for anybody.
That's
Completely
right.
Agree.
That's right. Yeah. And I think we're going to put this significant report together. Republican National Committee is, Harmeet and I and a couple others. And those are things that we're going to talk about. We're going to look at 22. And it's not just Henry Barbour's opinion, but let's look at the data. Let's look at the results and make serious recommendations for 24 that should be applied by the RNC, that should be applied by RGA and RSLC and state parties, and very importantly, candidates and campaigns and consultants.
Sure.
One of the things that happened to us in the 22 cycle that we just didn't see coming was the Dobbs decision. And all of a sudden, voter intensity on the Democrat side got much, much better. They caught up with us, in about a week's time. But a lot of our political consultants, media consultants to candidates were advising our candidates not to talk about the Dobbs decision. And so it allowed Democrats, particularly less a factor in, say, in Mississippi, but in a lot of other states and particularly states with, bigger populations, suburbia and all that, our candidates didn't talk about it. So Democrats were able to portray our candidates as the ones that are extreme. And I would argue if we should have been explaining how the Democrats are extreme and how so many Democrat candidates think you ought to be able to abort right up to the point of birth. And some of them even believe that if the abortion's botched, well, you still can kill the baby.
Just had a bill in the House, as you know, that couldn't get any Democrat support on that.
Yeah. And so
I agree.
So with some missed opportunities in 22, we need to apply those in 24.
All right. We got Henry Barbour. When we come back, we'll break down the 23 elections here in Mississippi, and then, of course, the national political scene is just around the corner in 24. Appreciate it. Henry Barbour, our guest here in the Element Well Studios, and we're coming right back. Element Well Studios, our guest is GOP strategist Henry Barbour. All right, so Henry, we've got some big races coming up here in Mississippi. The field is set with the exception of anyone who would care to qualify between now and 6 p.m. this evening. We'll hit the deadline. It's been moved up, as you well know, which makes it a little more interesting because that occurs just a month into the legislative session. I'm not sure how much that influenced or doesn't influence legislation, but it's certainly something that could be speculated, as it is different than in prior cycles. So we've got first at the top of the ticket, we've got the governor's race. Incumbent sitting Governor Tate Reeves will face a challenge on the Republican side from John Witcher, a physician in Yazoo City. And then, of course, I guess the big news this week, Brandon Presley on the Democrat side, a fairly well-known populist, I think, on the Democrat in the Democrat Party, the Public Service Commissioner in the Northern District. He wasted no time in his rebuttal to the State of the State address that Governor Reeves delivered. He wasted no time in offering his opinion there, shaping up to be quite the election season.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And you talk about this all happening with the legislature in town. You think they're paying any attention over there? No question.
I can guarantee it.
Yeah, no question about it that they are. And look, the governor's race is going to be entertaining, and Brandon Presley will be a serious opponent to Tate Reeves. But I will say this, Governor Reeves has been underestimated, I think, throughout his political career. I can remember in 2003, I was running Haley's race against Musgrove. That was like 100 years ago. And there's this guy, Tate Reeves, running for treasurer. And I'm like, I have no clue who he is. And I talked to him on the phone, and we saw him out on the road. And Tate, what Tate is, he is this meticulous worker. Mm-hmm. And other than Haley, I mean, he is one of the very, very few Republican candidates who's really serious about the mechanical side of campaigns, including fundraising. And nobody likes to do fundraising. Nobody likes to pick up the phone. But I tell you what, Tate has just been this persistent fundraiser. And so I think he's sitting there with about $8 million. And, Brandon Presley is, got an uphill battle on that side. Now, might Democrats from out of state think, hey, you know what, this is kind of a cheap opportunity, from their perspective to come in and maybe try to pick off a Republican governor. We got this, this Brandon Presley, Elvis's cousin of some sort, running. And that's a risk, that Tate faces. That outside money could come in, but I think Tate will win. I think this will come down to: do you want a conservative governor, or do you want something that Brandon Presley would say he's conservative, but most of us, you start talking about the issues, that ain't a conservative. And I think one of the issues that has really shown the contrast in what do you get from your government is COVID. And I think if you look at Florida, I think if you look at Mississippi, Georgia, where you had Republican governors, you had more freedom. The government didn't try to tell you everything that you got to do. And I think Tate was very serious about, we don't know what this COVID thing is. We got to figure it out. And he took it very seriously. And I don't
Early
think
on, for sure. Nobody knew.
Absolutely. And I think that's the right thing to do. But as soon as he figured out, okay, we need to make sure that businesses are running, people can go and earn a paycheck, so they can pay their bills. Schools stay open so we don't have not just semesters, but even years go by where kids aren't in their school. I mean, there are towns all over America where they had Democrat mayors, states where you had Democrat governors. And could you even go to church? Heaven forbid that we got the government telling us whether we can or can't go to church.
But you could buy booze and weed while you couldn't go to church.
Yeah, well, of course.
Some states.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, those are priorities. But I think that issue exposed Democrats in a way that Americans haven't forgotten. And I think it was particularly evident in the Virginia governor's race in 2021.
Yeah.
But I think it also was in 22. And so I think Brandon Presley, had he been governor during COVID, would have been much more like New York Governor Mario Cuomo than Tate Reeves or Ron DeSantis. And that has real implications on people's life.
Don't you feel like, and I agree with you, don't you feel like that even though someone like Brandon Presley could sort of portray himself as a moderate and maybe even to some extent conservative, but he's still influenced and often beholden to the National Party and their philosophy?
Well, I'm glad that Brandon is pro-life, and I'm glad that he and Tate can agree.
At least on that.
Yeah, that they can agree on that. That's an important issue. And so, look, I give him credit on that.
Yeah.
But the problem is, like most Democrats, he thinks the answer to your problems is taking somebody's money, spending it on government programs that they decide how your life should be impacted or run. And look, the government has a role. It has an important role to be a safety net. But, I think, Brandon is a big government liberal, and, I don't think he's a conservative. I'm glad we can agree on an issue like pro-life. That's important. I'm not mad at Brandon Presley. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I've met him a few times, and he's always nice as he can be, and that's great. But that's not enough. How are you going to run the state? And again, I just think COVID was one of those big issues that really exposed it. Your elections really do have consequences. They have public policy consequences. So that's going to be a fascinating race. Educate. The big issues in state races typically, no surprise, jobs, education, healthcare.
Yep.
And I think those are the big things that we'll be talking about. And I think Republicans, and I think this give credit to Phil Bryant, give credit to Tate Reeves and Delbert and Philip Gunn and legislators. We've really focused in on education issues and trying to put the public schools in the strongest position possible, and also trying to innovate with giving people choices and for other opportunities. And these are important things. And I think when Haley was running in 2003, we viewed, education's, it's a tougher issue for us. And we talked about, schools got to be, we got to have reform. They got to be responsible. But I think Republicans have come a long ways in understanding how fundamentally important, public schools are. If you don't have good public schools, your town is so limited. And we got lots of towns in the Delta that, are struggling with that.
Yeah. All right. So I agree with you on that. And I haven't thought the way you have, and it's a great point you make, Henry, that COVID really did sort of show the true colors politically. And the difference in the way the states reacted to it and governed, it couldn't be a sharper contrast. You make a great point. You look at Cuomo and Newsom in the deep blue states and their overreaction versus DeSantis. I can remember Rhino and I talked about on the show when DeSantis opened the beaches after we had learned then that, the chance of transmitting this outside, especially in the sun, is like nil. And the Democrats were clamoring that this was going to be a super spreader event and people were going to die because they were going to the beaches. It's a great point, though. It exposed the flanks of both sides and their philosophy, and I think one is about we got to give people some latitude, and the other is about we got to lock everybody up, and then that pervades the rest of their philosophy about government. And that's true here.
Yeah, Democrats got exposed with COVID.
No doubt.
And anyway, it'll be fascinating, and I don't know how much Tate and Brandon will talk about it, but if I was Tate Reeves, I would be sure to help make that contrast.
Good point. Can you stay around?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We can come back and hopefully discuss the next race on the ticket, which will be lieutenant governor. That's shaping up to be another fascinating one, to use your words there. Henry Barbour is our guest in the Element Well studios. It's midday, SuperTalk Mississippi. We're talking to Henry Barbour, a GOP strategist, about the upcoming political races. It's a big year in Mississippi, 2023, the odd year. Every 4, we go to the polls to vote on our statewide elected officials, all of our members of the legislature, of course. We were just discussing in the last segment, Henry, the governor's race. Let's go down the ballot now and talk about the lieutenant governor's race. This one is setting up to be maybe one of the most intriguing of all. Of course, incumbent Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann will seek his second term. And as of Monday, Chris McDaniel, State Senator Chris McDaniel, who is no stranger to statewide races, as you well know, it looks like he's running, not looks like, he is. He's running for lieutenant governor. That's in the books. He had a big announcement at GOP headquarters this past Monday. Your thoughts?
It's going to be a barn burner. For people who like watching political campaigns, this is going to be entertaining. Now, if you're Delbert or Chris, do you think that's entertaining? Maybe not, but I think for people who like to watch these things, you've got the incumbent lieutenant governor who's got great track record in office, and as Secretary of State helped bring voter ID. So I think Delbert's got a great track record. He's got, I think, about $4 million cash on hand, which is it's a big chunk of change. It wasn't that long ago that $4 million was the record spent in a state race. And I say it wasn't that long ago. Actually, I guess it was. It was, Haley spent $13.5 million in 2003, but before that, Fordyce had set the record, and it was about $4.5 million.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, and I'm aging myself, but this is going to be a really fascinating race. Chris McDaniel is arguably one of the most talented political performers in the state in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, I've watched a lot of this, and I will say, when Cochran was or speculation whether he would run again or not, back in 2014, and Chris McDaniel was thinking about running and kind of making noise, I completely underestimated the guy. And I didn't really know him. But my view is that, Thad Cochran is the gold standard for, politicians in Mississippi. He's a statesman. People get it. He's done great things for the state. And this just won't be a race. Maybe it's 60-40 or, something or whatever. And boy, was I wrong. I mean, what a race that was in so many ways. But my point is that this is going to be a tough race, and I think both camps know it. I think both candidates have their strengths and weaknesses. Delbert is more the workhorse. He loves public policy. He loves being over there at the Capitol and working on bills and being in the details, and along with Governor Reeves and the Speaker, he can take credit for helping bring the largest tax cut in the state's history. And I mentioned before, voter ID, which 80% of the people think is a great idea, and why wouldn't you? And Chris McDaniel's more of a show pony. He is a tremendous performer, but I've never seen him, that active on bills. He got animated when it was time to change the flag, and that will help him with some people and hurt him with some others.
Yeah.
But Gerard, this is going to be a race.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Do you think this will be somewhat of a repeat of the 14 Senate race, Senator Cochran? Will this be a repeat? Are we likely to see, you think, Henry, a very closely contested primary? We move to a runoff. What do you think? Hard to tell at this point, I know, but
I expect it will be a very competitive race.
Okay.
Delbert clearly the favorite, and Chris McDaniel, is the challenger. But it's gonna be a tight race, and it'll be fascinating. Chris McDaniel, won't have the money. But Chris McDaniel can do more with less than anybody else in the state politically, because he has a tremendous following on social media, and a lot of his people, they're fired up, and they'll make a lot of noise. Sometimes that social media noise, it doesn't necessarily translate to votes, though.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that in 2018 when he ran in the Senate. First, he was going to run against Wicker. Then he decided to run against Cindy Hott Smith. And, of course, Mike Espy was in that special election runoff when Senator Cochran retired, stepped down early. And I think Chris got 16, 17%. Cindy had President Trump's endorsement, and at that point, that was really powerful.
Yep.
So that was a factor. But anybody that underestimates Chris McDaniel will learn what I learned in 2014 is that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate him.
And I think that certainly the lieutenant governor would take some heed to what happened in 2014. And just like you said, that I think he was underestimated, and that's not the case.
Delbert will not.
Your own risk.
Delbert won't make that mistake. And I think we all know that Senator Cochran was up in years at that point, and Delbert is going to be a much more aggressive candidate, than Senator Cochran.
Yeah.
And so I think all of that will make for an interesting race. Again, I think if I had to put money on it, I'm going to put money on that the Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann, is reelected. But he's going to have to. He's going to have to go to work.
Yeah.
And look, and he's a workaholic anyway.
Yep.
And a runner.
Agree.
And a runner, which I like.
But that Chris is also a very hard worker on campaign trails.
He loves the campaign.
Loves campaigning. He's very good at it, and he'll go to every corner of the state.
And he connects with folks. He knows how to talk to people. He knows how to kind of feed them the red meat to get them excited. And so that's, it's interesting.
Right.
But yes, the lieutenant governor's race is going to be fascinating, and we'll have a lot of other interesting races, with the legislature and other. I think all the other statewide folks, Lynn Fitch, after the Dobbs decision and Supreme Court decision, Lynn doesn't want to underestimate anybody and take anything for granted, but she's in a strong political position, and I think the rest of our Republican statewide candidates or officials are as well. But I think we have a chance now to pick up the Brandon Presley's seat on the Public Service Commission.
That's right.
And so I think that's a good opportunity for the Republican Party. So
that's a good point. Yep.
We just got to keep picking up. We need to pick up more and more of the local races. As a party, we've done a lot of that. Brad White, as chairman, was great about that. He really put an emphasis on that. But we got to keep doing that. I know Frank Bordeaux is not just thinking about the governor's race. He's thinking about from the courthouse all the way to the governor's mansion.
Absolutely.
And that's the right way to go about it.
Before you go, 2024, right around the corner. I mean, we come off the heels of the 2023 statewide elections right into the national elections in 24, presidential election year. Of course, all the members of the House, Senator Wicker, would be up for re-election as well. Let's talk about, before you go, the presidential field. What's that looking like? Nikki Haley looks like she's in. Tim Scott going to Iowa. Looks like he's probably in. Sununu thinking about it. Ron DeSantis. Of course, President Trump former President Trump already announced. What do you think?
Well, there's a reason we're going to have a lot of Republicans look very seriously at it. The country's going the wrong direction. And we got a president that doesn't have great approvals. Most folks think we got to get this guy out of there.
Yeah.
And I don't think Vice President Harris is, what they got in mind for replacing him. So whoever wins the Republican nomination for president is going to be in a really strong position to become the next president.
Let's hope so.
And we should pick up the majority in the Senate.
Right. Sets up good
and
force.
hopefully grow in the House. So it's a great year, hopefully, for Republicans. But we got to get the right candidates who have an aspirational message and not a divisive, backward-looking message.
Totally agree. Appreciate your insight as always, Henry. That was excellent, and we'll certainly be tracking all this, and I know we'll be talking more. Thanks for coming in.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Henry Barbour, GOP Strategist, has been our guest. Coming right back on Middays, the Speaker of the House at 12:05. Thanks.